This video is a little long, but if you look in the description below the video, you'll see something similar to this. It's called YouTube Chapters. Click on the topic that interests you, and the video will jump to that section. Find that below in the description. Here is the block made using paper piecing. It finishes at 12 inches, and there is a 6-inch size available as well. And here is the block made using the pineapple trim tool. It finishes at 10 inches, but you can also make other sizes. These foundation papers are available from the Fat Quarter shop. There are 42 pages in this one book. This finishes at 12 inches. So all of these are just the paper, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But one thing I wanted to show you before that is there is a very large square on point in the center. This is different than the ACCUQUILT that had a small square and they had more rows of different fabrics, but this is just as beautiful and it's bigger. So this was made where you can use one of your charm squares. So if you have charm squares you want to put, they'll fit perfectly in here. If not, we can cut 5-inch squares. And you'll see these are numbered, and you're going to piece, this like piece by number. So start with 1, then go 2, 3, 4, 5, all that way. Now for fabric, it says you can use 2.5-inch pre-cut strips and 10-inch square pre-cuts. So you would cut your 10-inch squares in half twice, and you'd have 4 of the squares for your center block, if you like. On the other side, see, when you flip this open and flip this around like this, this is some tips and requirements and all that, and tells you how to stitch it. But right here on the cutting, it has what you'll need to cut for the light fabrics and the dark fabrics. Printing is very light on here, but you can see the cutting. What I'm going to show you today is how to use the quilting apps from my blog and take these numbers and see how much fabric you need for whatever size quilt you want. So here is the light fabrics, and it tells you where they're placed. Like this is number 1, this is 6 through 9, 14 through 17, and so forth. And then here are the dark fabrics. So the first thing you have to do is decide how big you want your quilt. And we'll go to our quilting app to see how to size a quilt for what size we need. And there's a link. You'll also want to download this quilting apps worksheet. There'll be a link in the description just below this video to download this, and you want to print out the 2 pages that are on there. If you want to get to these quilting apps on your phone, on an iPad, or on your desktop, you would just scan this and it will take you there. Pull out your camera app and point it to this. It'll turn into a yellow square. Then you click on it or press it, and it will open up these quilting apps. There's also a link in the description below this video. To zero it out, since I was using it before, you hit the refresh page. Now this has a lot of ads on it, but make the screen bigger. You won't be able to see them. Okay, so let's say that you want a quilt that's 65 by 85. We're going to fill out our quilting apps worksheet for this quilt. I'll call this paper pieced pineapple. I'll just put pine. So this part is the quilt finished size. So when we work with this quilt sizing app, we always use the finished size of everything. And our desired width was 65 by 85. And that might not be our exact width when we finish, but this is what we want. And also on the sheet, I've written the finished size of the block. The width is 12 inches and the length is 12 inches. So all we need is the desired size of the quilt and the size of the finished block. Now we go to our quilting app on the blog, and there are 2 calculators on this page. The first one is called Sizing a Quilt. We're going to use that first. Enter the block width is 12 inches and the length is 12 inches. And we always use the finished size on this application. Now we're just going to look at the blocks across and the blocks down, and unless you want to use a calculator to see how big it would be, you can just put numbers in here and see what the numbers show you. So I'm going to put 5 across and I'll put 7 down. And then you press this calculate button and it gives you your results. So this gives you a quilt width of 60 inches and a length of 84. Well, we wanted this 65 by 85. If we added another block to the quilt width, that would make it 72 inches wide. So it would be 72 by 84. So I think I want to make it just smaller, and I'll leave it here at 60 by 84. So then we'll look at the information here, that the other information that came in our results, and we see the total number of blocks is 35. So that answers your question, how many blocks do I need for this size quilt? Now we'll just transfer that number here. Let me move this. Number of blocks is 35, and our actual width and length, we'll put that, was just calculated. So we'll put 60 by 84. And then the next one is the setting, across and down. So here are your numbers. Across is 5 and down is 7. So that's your setting. You're going to set the blocks 5 by 7. And we're not going to do the sash or the border right now. That's going to be for another lesson. And you also get the number of binding strips you need. You need 8 strips, so we're going to write that down. 8 strips, and the yardage is 0.56 yards. So now I've gotten, this whole top part is filled out with the information for this quilt. But I'm going to make mine 24 inches, and I'm going to have 4 blocks. So I'll get my paper I've already filled out. So here's my desired size and my actual size and my number of blocks, and my finished size is 12 by 12. And I'm going to set them 2 across and 2 down. Now we're going to look at how much fabric do we need for this. We're going to figure out the fabric for my quilt. So now we're going to go to page 2 of the download, the worksheet that you downloaded. And you'll see it has patch. You can name your patch or number your patch. You can put which fabric it is, dark, light, blue, red. And this will be the lengthwise grain we're going to cut and the crosswise grain. Then we have the number in blocks, in the block, the number of this patch that's in the block, how many blocks, and then we'll figure out how much fabric we need. So to do this, for this one, we'll look at the light fabrics first. So I'm going to call this 1 because they put it placement 1. So this is going to be patch 1, and the fabric is going to be light. So I'll write that down. And here it says you want a 5-inch square. So we'll write the 5 inches here, lengthwise grain and crosswise grain. The number in block, this says you need 1, right over here. So we'll put 1, there's 1 in the block, and we are doing 4 blocks. If you were making the other bigger quilt, you would put a 35 here, and you would have 35 pieces, but we only have 4 pieces because we're only making 4 blocks. Let's see, do you see that? There's 1 in each block, and there are 4 blocks, so 1 times 4 is 4. We need 4 pieces of this patch. Now let's move down to the next one. This one is 5 1/4 by 2 1/2, so we're going to put 5.25 and 2.5 here, and we'll call this patch 6 through 9 because this is what the placement numbers. So we'll say 6 through 9, and this is also light. Okay. So the number we need for each block is 4. So we'll put 4 here. There's 4 in each block, and we have 4 blocks. So 4 times 4 is 16. So we'll need 16 pieces of that to make my 2x2 quilt. And let's continue to the third one. This is going to be 14 through 17, and it's also light. And its measurements are 6 1/2, 6.5 by 2.5. And we also need 4 for each block. So we'll put a 4 here, and we have 4 blocks. So 4 times 4 is 16. And then the last one we have is 22 through 25. It's also light. And this one is 5 inches by 3 inches. This one also has 4 in each block, so we'll put 4 here. There are 4 blocks and 16 pieces. Next we'll just continue down and we're going to do the dark fabrics. So this one, the first one is fabric 2-5, and it's dark. And the measurements are 5 inches by 2.5 inches, 2.5. We also need 4 in each block, so we have 4 blocks. No, we have 4 in each block, and 4 blocks is 16 pieces. And then patch 10 through 13 is dark, and it is 6 inches lengthwise grain and 2.5 inches on the crosswise grain. There are 4 in each block, and we have 4 blocks. And finally, our last one is number 18-21. It's dark, and it is 8 inches by 2.5 inches. We have 4 in each block, and we have 4 blocks, so 16. There's going to be a lot of repetition in here, but that'll make it go faster. These are all 2.5 inches, or most all of them are 2.5 inches, so if you have jelly roll strips or 2.5 inch strips left, well then you would just cut off the piece you need and put it in there. You don't need to figure out how much yardage you need. Now we have 7 different patches we need to figure out, and I'm going to draw a line through here because I've got my light ones up here and my dark ones down here. Now we'll go to the quilting app page. Next one, it's called How Much Fabric Do I Need? And it's done in patches. We go down to this part. The only things we need here are the lengthwise grain and the crosswise grain cuts and the number needed. So let's scooch this over a little bit. So I'll take the first one. The lengthwise grain is 5 inches and the crosswise grain is 5 inches, and we need 4 pieces. So we'll put 5 here and 5 here crosswise and a 4 here because we need 4 pieces. And then this one, you don't have to hit the calculate button. It gives you the results as soon as you type in the last one. So here are our results. We're going to cut 1 strip at 5 inches times the width of fabric. And we'll transfer these numbers onto this paper. Cut 1 strip at 5 inches times the width of fabric. So we transfer this to the paper. Cut 1 strip at 5 inches times the width of fabric. You subcut each strip into 8 segments, but we really don't need 8. We only need 4 of 5 inches for a total of 4 patches. Here's the fabric you need: 5 inches or 0.14 yards. And I know this is kind of insignificant, but if you add all of this to the other light fabrics, then you'll have a total yardage you need for your light fabrics. Now we go to our next fabric. The lengthwise grain is 5.25 and the crosswise is 2.5, and we need 16 pieces. So we'll put those numbers in there: 5.25 and 2.5, and then here we put 16. And then here are our results. We cut 1 strip at 5 1/4 inches times the width of fabric. Subcut each strip into 16 segments of 2.5 inches each. Here's the yardage we need: 6 inches or approximately 0.17 yards. So I'm going to transfer those to this paper. Cut 1 strip at 5.25 inches times the width of fabric. Cut each strip into 16 segments at 2.5 inches. and the fabric we need is 6 inches or 0.17 yards. So the next one, we have our lengthwise is 6.5, our crosswise is 2.5, and we need 16 patches. So let's go back up to here. So we put 6.5 here, not 62.5. And then here are our results. You cut one strip at 6.5 inches times width of fabric. Subcut each strip 16 segments of 2.5 inches. And here's our 7 inches or 0.19 yards. And I'll transfer that here. Cut one at 6.5 times width of fabric and cut each strip into 16 segments at 2.5 inches. And we need 7 inches or 0.19 yards. Let's finish off the light fabric and I'll show you how to get your total. So this next one, the very last light one, is 5 inches lengthwise grain and 3 inches crosswise, and we need 16 pieces. So let's change this to 5 inches. That stays the same at 2.5, and this stays the same at 16. So we cut one strip at 5 inches, cut each into 16 segments of 2.5 inches. We need 5 inches or 0.14 yards. So I will transfer those down to here. Now you will do the same thing for the 3 dark fabrics, but I want to show you how to total up all the light fabrics. We'll take our paper, this is mine. I'm going to cut off all the light fabrics so I can just look at those right now. So here is my front page. I'm going to take my glue stick and glue this on this page. And I'll write my notes down here that I need for the light fabric. So these are all my light fabrics. And for 4 blocks, I'm going to take the number of inches of fabric we need. So this is 5 here, 6, 7, and 5. And if we add those together, it's 23 inches. So the light fabric, we need 23 inches. So what is that in yards? Here's what you do. Hey Siri, how many yards is 23 inches?
23 inches is 0.64 yards.
So then you write down 0.64 yards. That's slightly under 3/4 of a yard. And that's what you would need for 4 blocks for the light fabric. You'll do the same thing with the dark fabric, and then you'll add these up, add the fabric inches up, and then convert it to yards. And then you'll have how much fabric you need for the dark. When I put these numbers in, I always have the lengthwise grain to be the longer side, because I find it easier to cut a 5 1/4 inch strip and then cut 2.5 inch strips off of that, subcut that, than it is to cut a bunch more 2.5 inch strips and cut 5 1/4 inch strips off of that. So all of these I put, the lengthwise grain was the higher number. But like if you have your 2.5 inch strips you want to use, you just cut off the pieces you need. So now you have everything figured out and you're ready to cut. I would go here and just follow the cutting instructions. Cut one strip at 5 inches times the width of fabric, and then subcut it into 4 pieces. You only need 4 pieces. And then you've got enough for your patch 1. Then go to the next one and you're still with the light fabric. You'll cut one strip at 5 1/4 inches, subcut that into 16 pieces at 2.5 inches. Same thing with this. So you're actually going to cut for this quilt, the 24-inch square quilt, you're going to be cutting one strip of each of these. But if you had a much larger quilt, you would be cutting 5, 6, 7 strips and then subcutting them. It just depends on what size quilt you have, because these numbers here, if you have 1 in the block but you've got 20 blocks, then you'll need 20 pieces of that. Same thing here, if you've got 4 in the block and you've got 20 blocks, that's 80 pieces here. So that could be a lot of cutting. Now I have my fabrics cut. Here are my darks and here are my lights. I've got them in their stacks. We start in the center when we're piecing, but I wanted to show you how to organize your fabrics so they won't get out of whack and you can go faster. What you want to do is put the higher numbers at the bottom. So the light fabric that is 22, 23, 24, and 25 is 5 by 3 inches. So this is the piece that goes at the bottom. Put that up here. And then the next one is going to be a dark, and it's the 19, 20, 21, and 18, which is the 8-inch piece. So that goes next. Put that on top. Then the light one, that's the 17, 14, it's a 6.5 inch long piece, 6.5 inch, that goes on top of that. And then the dark will have the 6-inch piece, and it goes here. And then the next light is the 5 1/4 inch, so that's got to be this one. And then this one is the only one left, and then the center. I switched out my fabrics, my light color fabric, because I did a test block and I wasn't real crazy about this background color. You need a ruler with a 1/4 inch mark, and you need a glue stick. You can use these small glue sticks. There's different brands, and they're actually a 1/4 inch because we're going to be putting the glue in the seam allowance. Or I just use usually the glue stick and just use the tip of the glue stick. We'll take our ruler, placing the ruler on this line, this number 1 line. Then I'm folding it up like this against the ruler, just putting a crease in it to mark it. And then I'm going to go to this other line here, put the ruler against it, fold it up, and then we'll put a crease across there too. I'm going to do all 4 of the sides of space number 1. Okay. Now if we turn it over, we'll see this space in here is what we want to cover with this. We'll just center this on there. Take our glue stick, put a little glue on the paper, and then just center this on like this. Now we'll flip it over, and the rest of the time we're going to be working from the printed side. So we'll go to, this is number 1, now we're going to go to number 2. It's already creased, so we're just going to crease this back, and you see we have a little bit of fabric here. Take my ruler and put the 1/4 inch mark along the fold of this paper. And what I'm doing is trimming off a 1/4 inch. So now I've trimmed off a 1/4 inch from the fold of the paper to the edge of the fabric. And we'll take our first stack, which is the dark, and you know it's going to be dark because this is the shaded piece here. We'll take this piece and put it right side up, grab this, center it, and line up the top edges. So if you look here, I've got that underneath here, and these top edges are lined up. So you lift this top one up, and you put 2 or 3 dabs of glue in the seam allowance, and then press it down, and it will stay. Make your stitches smaller. It's easier for the paper to tear it off. It's kind of floppy at first because everything is so big. You'll take this to your machine and place it like this on your machine. Here's your needle coming down this way. Then you're going to flip this over, and you have to slide this entire piece of paper underneath your needle. Stitch on this line between 1 and 2. We're going to start 2 or 3 stitches outside the line, stitch on the line, and stitch 2 or 3 stitches beyond that line. Here's my stitching. You see I started right here just beyond the line, stitched on the line, and then stitched 2 or 3 stitches off the line. Then you turn it over. Now I don't like finger pressing. You can finger press if you like, but I take this to the iron and press it. But you can, since you have space here, you can go ahead and stitch number 3. So we started number 1, then number 2, and 2 and 3 are opposite of each other. Then 4 and 5 are opposite of each other. So we can do the opposite sides before we have to press. And to do this one, number 3, we'll do the same thing. We already have a crease here, so we'll just fold it back. Take our ruler and place the 1/4 inch mark along the fold line and trim off a 1/4 inch. Take your next piece with the right side up and put this one on top and match the top edges. Glue and put a few little dabs in the seam allowance. And now we'll sew this one the same way. Now this is stitched, and we're going to take this to the ironing board and press these out. Now we're going to do number 4. And we do have a crease here, but since we have stitches going beyond here, put your ruler down, fold the paper up, and fold the paper and the fabric up, and fold it down this way. And you see the fabric is stitched, so just pull the stitches so they'll lay flat. 1/4 inch line on the fold and trim. And you take the third piece, and now you're going to center it on these 2 lines of stitching. Take your glue stick and put your little dabs of glue. Now we'll turn this around and do the other one and sew both of them together. Now I've sewed and pressed 4 and 5. So flip it back over. Now the next one in our stack is the light fabric, and this is going to be 6, 7, 8, and 9. And remember, we're doing opposites. So we'll start with number 6. And now it's just going to be repetition of what you just did. Here's what the front looks like after all the paper piecing is done. Now we turn it over. This outside line we're going to trim. The inside line is the stitching line, but we're going to trim the outside line and then take the papers off. When I'm trimming the outside lines, I put my 1/4 inch mark on the 1/4 inch line here. If I use the 1/4 inch line on the stitching line, you just cover it up and you can see exactly where it's going, and then you trim. And there you have your finished block. The last thing to do, take the papers out. The last one you stitched on is the first one you take out. Grab the paper and tear against the stitches. Then pull this up to open up this paper and tear against the stitches. And then just start going around and doing all that. And that's paper piecing the pineapple block. This is the pineapple trim tool from Creative Grids. This one makes a 6 inch, 8 inch, and 10 inch block. And it's got all kinds of markings on it that you're going to use. It has a 45-degree angle here that we're going to use to cut half of the rounds, and then this 90-degree to cut the other half of the rounds. There's also Pineapple Trim Tool Mini, and it makes 4, 5, and 6 inch finished blocks. But this one, you cut 1 1/4 inch strips, and with this one, the one we're going to use today, you cut 1 3/4 to 2 inch wide strips. And in my demo, I'm going to be cutting 1 3/4 inch strips. Here's my test block I made, and this is actually my 3rd attempt because my first 2 attempts I had cut the strips too short and nothing was coming out, and I finally realized I was cutting for the mini tool and not for the regular size tool. We have the center block, which you cut at 2.5 inches, and this is the same size for whether it's an 8 inch, 6 inch, or 10 inch finished block. These corner pieces, they call them rabbit ear corners. I just call them corners. These are all cut at 2.5 by 4 inches, no matter what size block you're finishing. And then all of the rounds here are done with the strips. And here are the instructions, and I'm going to go over them with you. So here's the cutting. You cut for the center square, you cut a precise 2.5 inch square. This is the only time you have to be precise. This talks about the strips. They have to be 1 3/4 to 2 inches wide at least. And here are the rabbit ear corners. You cut 4, at 2.5 by 4 inches. In sewing, you're going to sew a scant quarter seam allowance. And then it's divided into rounds. So round 1 is when you add the first pieces to the center square. And I marked this so I can easily see on here. Here's round 1, here's round 2. So you're going to sew the strips around the first round. And then for cutting, this is where it's really easy to get confused when you're just starting. This is the angle cut. When it says angle cut, that means you're going to use this cut here for that round. And when it says corner cut, you're going to use this corner here for the cutting. So angle cut, corner cut. Now, of course, I have a download for you, and this is for the pineapple trim tool for the 6, 8, and 10-inch blocks. I have the fabric and cutting requirements, and I have the information you need to use the quilting app to find out how much fabric you need for larger quilts. On this side, I have the center square is cut 2.5 inches. The strips are cut 1 3/4 inches times the width of fabric, and the corners are cut 2.5 inches by 4 inches. And I have the rounds here, so we start with round 1 through 8. We're going to cut 4 segments, and the segments you're going to cut from the 1 3/4 inch strips. So for instance, for round 1, you'll cut 2.5 inch segments from your 1 3/4 inch strips. Round 2, you'll cut 4 at 3.5. Round 3, you'll cut 4 at 4.5, and it goes down this way. If you're going to make the 6-inch finished block, you stop here. You only do 4 rounds. For the 8-inch block, you do 6 rounds. And for the 10-inch block, you do all 8 rounds. And over here are the patches you will use with the quilting app. Let's find out how much fabric you need. For the center patch, you need 1 per block, so you'll have to multiply that times the number of blocks. The lengthwise cut is 2.5, and the crosswise cut is 2.5. For the corner patches, there are 4 in the block. The lengthwise is 2.5, and the crosswise is 4 inches. And it goes all the way down here. So if you're stopping at the 6-inch block, you'll stop here. This is the 8-inch block, you'll stop here, and the 10-inch block, you do the entire chart. I've stacked my fabrics just like I did for the paper piece version, where this is the center square is on top, round, then this is round, all the way down to round 8, and then the rabbit ear corners are at the bottom. We'll start with our center square, 2.5 inches. Sew opposite sides. If you like to finger press, you can sew these 2 sides and finger press, and then sew these sides and finger press. But me, I like to press, so I'll sew these first and press them, then I'll sew these on and press them. Here's my round 1 stitched on. Now I'm going to trim round 1. And we'll look here. We've sewn round 1, so we've done that. Now we're going to cut round 1, and we're going to use the angle. Place the white square marked centering square round 1 on the center square of the stitched unit and trim all 4 sides. So here's our trim tool, and this is the centering square round 1. See, it's the white square, centering square round 1. We're going to place this on top of the center square, like this. And I try to match all 4 sides, get it as even as possible. And we're going to trim here. Okay. Now we rotate this to the next one. Put the centering square over the square again. If you have a rotating cutting mat, this is a great time to use it. So now we have round 1. And always remember that this first light one, or whatever the first one is you put, is round 1. We'll take our round 2 patches, and we just cut across these edges. So we're going to stitch here and here. They might be a little bit longer than you need, but that's okay. And you can either finger press or press and then stitch the other two like this. I've sewn on round 2 and I'm about to trim round 2, but you might notice this is not the same unit. Here's the unit, and I showed you how to cut round 2, but I forgot to turn the record button on. So round 2 is pretty important. We're going to do round 2 on here. So for round 2, you read this section, and now we're going to take the corner, round 2. Place the black dashed square marked centering square round 2 on the center square of the stitched unit. Trim 2 sides, turn the stitched unit 180 degrees, and trim the remaining 2 sides. So we place this line, the centering square round 2, it's the dark dashed line. We place this on the center square, and we use these lines here. There's some dashed white lines to help us place the fabric. And I see that it's a little bit off on this side, but I'm going to go with the center square, and this side is all lined up. Now I'm going to trim these 2 sides. Then I'll flip this around and place it the same way on the other 2 sides and trim these. And here is our round 2 trimmed. But here's the one we're working on, so they look the same. Now we'll take our round 3 patches, stitch them the same way. Stitch opposite sides first, then stitch the other opposite sides and press. We have stitched round 3. Now we're going to trim round 3, and we cut round 3, the angle. Place the 45-degree white angle line on the seam line of round 2 and trim all 4 sides. We'll place this 45-degree white line along the seam line of round 2. And we're going to use these white dashed lines here and the solid line here to help us position the ruler. Here's round 1, round 2. Here's the seam line of round 2. Put our 45-degree line on it. Use our dashed lines to help center. And then the dashed lines are here, and then the solid line is here. It sort of cuts these angles here. And we're going to trim. Now we're starting to flatten out this previous row. Flip this around and line it up again, and do this for all 4 sides. And there's our trimmed round 3. And we'll keep going. We'll add our round 4 patches to the top and bottom and the sides. Now we trim round 4, and the instructions say to place the centering square round 4, and we're going to use the corner. So we'll place this centering square round 4 on the center. Use our line-up lines to help us position it. Now we're going to cut this corner off. Cut here and here. Flip it around and line it up again. Cut here and here. And now we have trimmed round 4. This is where you're going to stop if you want to make the 6-inch block. And if you are, you will put your little dog ears on the 4 corners, sew them down, and then you'll use the ruler to square it off. And I'll show you that when we do round 10. So now you know the drill. We sew on round 5, top and bottom, then sides, and we'll trim round 5. You just keep going like this till you reach round 8. Now we've attached the corners and we're going to trim them to make a square block. We'll use the same centering square round 8 and place it on the center square. And your seam allowances, all these edges should be trimmed exactly along the line of the ruler, these two sides. And we're going to trim these two corners. I'm just going to flip it around and do these other two. So round 8, line these up and trim. And there's your 10-inch finished pineapple block. If you enjoyed these videos, please share them with your friends, and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos.